Could you dim the lights, please? I want to show you this short video. This is taken in my compost area. You know, I really appreciate Korean natural farming practices. It's difficult for me to have the time, though, to make these preparations sometimes, and so especially when you're making them in a gallon jar, you know, and cutting them up with scissors, or, you know. So anyhow, the beautiful thing about what's happening on my farm is our compost piles that support our farm, all of a sudden I get beautiful purslane show up. And by the time the purslane's ready to go, I just harvest it and I put it in these tubs that you can get from, you know, the big box stores, or you can get them around the island. You've seen these tubs, these plastic tubs. And so what I did, I just put all the purslane I had in that tub and used approximately 4 pounds of sugar for this video. So could you roll that, please? There is sound, but that's okay if you don't have to have it on. It's on. So this I can be the sound. So in essence, I just dump the sugar on top of the purslane. That was 4 pounds to approximately get a tub. And I take a flat spade. See that flat spade? That's an invaluable tool. Okay, on a number, I can't do without that on my farm. I use it in a lot of respects on my farm. But you see how quick work it makes for chopping up that much purslane and getting the sugar mixed in evenly, you know, throughout it. So these videos, there's 2 short videos. They're about, I guess, about 3 minutes long. The both of them 4 minutes long, and that's how fast you can get that made. 3 gallons of fermented plant juice. You know, so you can really start to think along the lines of expediting the making of these preparations. What I would suggest, though, is make sure your spade isn't rusty. Okay, so because you don't want iron contents to start getting in your FPJ to where it's not a good thing for your soil, unless you need iron, you know. But as you can see, you know, it doesn't take much, yeah. Then you just flip them around, you know, just do whatever you need to do to get it to where it's going to be. And then I'll show you in this video, try to keep it in the tub. But yeah, you can see how it turns into a mash, yeah? And so you get it all throughout. That's the important thing. Now you see some of the stems I'm looking, so the stems still need some more chopping. So you just get it down and you just chop it to where it then just becomes a mash, and then you put that in your jar, and you only fill up your jar 3/4 of the way. And why is that, people that aren't certified? You want the air for what? What do you want to inhabit inside your jar? What do you want to come in? The lactic acid bacteria, right. That's the mother of bacterias. And you know, it was great. Richard yesterday was sharing that he doesn't put his fermentations in the house, or, you know, he sticks them outside so the lactic acid bacteria will inhabit, you know, from the outside as part of, get that bacteria instead of the ones in the house, yeah. So as you can see, that tub full of purslane now is all of a sudden pretty processed down in short order, yeah. And you're standing up doing it, which is real comfortable, and yeah, it works out really well. So, you know, as being at the place of farming for as long as I farmed, you know, you always look for other ways to do it, to hone your ability to get to the end result in a way that's, I can still spend some time at the beach. And, okay, so we're pretty much there. There you go, yeah. So that's cool, yeah? Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Okay, when we put it in the jar, you know, then I get these 2-gallon jars from, I think I got it from one of the big box stores, 2 gallons, wide mouth, yeah. And then I just put it in the jar and make sure there's no air pockets, you know, just pound it down with my fist, 3/4 of the way. And then I use the paint strainer. You go to a paint store and they have those nylon paint strainers. Have you seen those 5-gallon paint strainers? You put that over with a rubber band and that's it, pal. Yeah. And this way air can still get in there. You're not having any issue with any kind of molds or anything. No water, no, I don't use any water. The osmotic pressure, you know, osmotic pressure draws the water out of the plant from the sugar. You know, the sugar actually draws the water out of the plant. And so then at the end of the week, you're going to have a lot of liquid that you just strain off. And then I take all that purslane and I put it in my worm bins. And the wormies really love it. Yeah.
Just put it in the jar, you don't layer it with more sugar?
No, that's it right there. That's done. Don't have to layer with more sugar. And it produces a lot of liquid. Yeah, that tub, basically, it wasn't even full with purslane. And I put 4 pounds of sugar and it just worked out really great, you know. And you'll get a feel for how much sugar is needed, yeah.
If you don't have access to purslane,
If you don't have access to purslane, you want to use something that is succulent. You know, watercress is really good. I tried it. I had mallow come up in my, area like nobody's business. I thought, oh, good, I'll make it into a fermented plant juice. And it's like, oh, yeah. Hardly got any water out of it, you know. So, Drake, I don't know, would you suggest putting water in something like that where the FPJ is not producing the amount of water that you would, want from a plant?
No, not water. If you want to increase the osmotic pressure a little bit, you can add a little bit of salt in with your sugar.
There you go.
Salt really helps to draw out, like dry things like sweet potato. A little bit of salt will really help to draw out.
You hear that, everybody? Put some salt in with the sugar. Yeah, a little pepper and a little garlic, and then stir fry them up. No. Yes.
You don't want water. And I was told yesterday that you pick it in the morning.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, dear.
You have to pick it in the morning when it's fresh.
Right, yeah, you pick it in the morning before the dew burns off it, right? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. That's when the plants are waking up, in a sense, and you want to get all the vitality from the plant. And just look around. I mean, these piles that I got the purslane off of are 21 years old. They've been cultured. Every week, us cutting our trays and composting them and doing this in cyclical motion like I showed yesterday. And it's so neat to see how the farm supports by growing that, People are going, oh, what you got? Why are you letting that weed grow in your pile? They just don't understand that that's a resource from my point of view. And it's invaluable. The fermented plant juice is really invaluable. Yes, dear.
So for the plant juice, it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's a juicy.
Yeah, you want succulent. You want to get a succulent plant that will have that'll give you a lot of water, because you're putting time into processing it. You want to make sure that the time you're putting in, you'll get some results, and that helps you keep excited about what it could represent. Now that, like I said, Lisa, could I have that jar over there, please? Yeah, thank you. This, and I'll pass this around if you haven't seen this yet, but this is how flowers as a fermented plant juice, and this is a spreader sticker, meaning that when I put it into my, and you want to pass it around so people can see it, take a look at it, smell it, eat it. It's really good. My wife, who's local, said, oh, it's like Li Moi, So that, when you put the how flowers, and I did it the same way here, every day when I go up Eau Valley, I'll in the morning, first thing in the morning, and there's all the how flowers that drop on the ground. I pick them all up and gather and collect for about a week, and then I got plenty of how flowers and mix it with the brown sugar. And so when you use this in your formulation, it helps the other amendments that you're spraying stick to the plant and spread out. Like Drake was saying yesterday with his tea leaf spreader. That was pretty cool, by the way, Drake. I mean, you rocked that one, man. That was very cool, yeah. And so this way, when you're spreading that out, you can get really nice coverage. The only thing you have to do is you have to strain it, when you're putting it through if you're going to actually spray it with a sprayer that could get clogged. But getting into that's a really great fermented plant juice, and I think you really like what it represents. The how flowers are so beautiful too, beautiful flowers. Yeah.
In making the plant juice, you're saying everybody only use brown sugar. Is that because it comes from cane, as opposed to CNH or any other kind of sweet sugar?
Who could answer that? Why the brown sugar? Yeah, Drake, come here.
I just want to let you know, to provide support and the questions and answers. I know we learned a lot yesterday, so I host a meeting every second Tuesday right here to give support. And then also naturalfarminghawaii.net has a lot of videos and answers to these questions. So just to let you know on that end, the website, meeting here, or contacting us to get more QA and support, because today is kind of panels and things. So to give you a chance to get your questions answered, please use those or see us today. But to finish up that question on the sugar, you know, the highest quality brown sugar you can use, I think, well, what was the exact question again?
Well, why use brown sugar and not white sugar?
Okay.
White sugar comes from beets and brown sugar from cane.
Yeah, so why use brown sugar versus white sugar? White sugar has been bleached, and also the minerals have been taken out. So when you use that, the bleach interferes with your microbes. Just like if you eat a lot of white sugar, it you know, your body decays because it pulls the minerals out of you. Same with your the microorganisms. They're not going to be very healthy in a white sugar solution. So the highest quality brown sugar. Also, I recommend cane sugar if you can get it versus beet sugar. Yeah, I mean, it's all, there's a number of reasons, but also I see one of the things for Hawaii and for us as natural farmers is ko, which in Chinese means revolution, which also in Hawaiian means sugarcane. And so I believe all those correspondences mean that we really need to focus on growing sugar if we want to see this revolution and evolution take place. And so the more sugar we get and the more pono it is, that's the starting place for all of our, you know, farming and natural farming is sugar. So just to put that out there of ko, the revolution, sugar. And so any questions, naturalfarminghawaii.net or see us. But mahalo.
Yeah, baby. Right on, Drake. Okay, great. And any other questions? Yes, dear. Can you speak up louder, please? Is anyone fermenting in clay jars? I do. I do my IMO 2 in a clay jar. Yeah? Do I notice a difference? I've never done it any other way, so I don't have anything to relate it to. Yeah, Dr. Park. Dr. Park, come up here, please. We want to make sure we get to hear your mana'o.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The particular clay jar, the Master Cho explains that clay jar is breathing. Versus if you use a plastic or glass jar, they're not breathable in the side way, upper way you can make it. So he told me the primary purpose of that one is breathing through the, you know, so you don't use a clay jar with the blazed, you know, the glazed, I mean, not blazed. Yeah. So the clay jar without glazed is the one most ideal one. Of course, if you look at it, the clay jar has a little darkness in the, you know, most of the clay jar is a kind of dark brownish, right? So it does not interfere too much the sunlight, because fermentation is a very important purpose. We're using those things, and the best condition of the fermentation is that you have that jar with 2/3 of the contents inside, and 1/3 is the air. That's the best condition to make a fermentation process happening. That's the reason why you mentioned the 2/3, you fill it out. But one thing that I should mention is that if you have, say, the watercress, when you put it in, mix with the brown sugar and put it in, press hard. Even after that, you put this stone so that you can just push it down. Actually, Master Cho recommends just fill it up on the top. The next morning you see that's all down is 2/3 already, right? So if you can just push it all the way up and then put something in the stone or something on top of it, then next morning is 2/3, which is a very good condition for the fermentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yeah, what a wealth of information and experience in these protocols. You know, just as in Search of Balance is the movie tomorrow night, yeah. There's only 50 parking stalls for that movie. It's at the Wainaku Executive Center, 1 mile north of Hilo. Russell Ruderman, our Senator Russell Ruderman, will be presenting before the movie. It starts at 6 o'clock, so we're encouraging carpooling. There are, Lay over there has some parking permits that you can get for parking. And I feel like she's Carol Marrell, you know, standing with it behind door number 1, you know. Great job, Lay. Let me see. So we're going to move on here. I really appreciate everybody in the house this morning. On a Friday morning, this is impressive. And so without further ado, I'd like to get this started with Jeff Melrose, who is being contracted by the University of Hawaii to do a statewide database, a baseline on our agricultural farms that are existing. And I'll let Jeff further articulate his work. And please give a warm welcome to Jeff.
Let me just start by saying I know on your program is somebody you'd rather hear from me than me, from Scott Enright. Scott texted me early this morning. I was going to pick him up and bring him here, and he said he woke up this morning ill and isn't coming. So it was his health that kept him here, not his desire to be a part of this conversation. And I know for him, every time he comes to the Big Island, this is where he lives in Ocala, so it's his chance to go home and spend time with his family. Okay, let me just start with a little bit about myself so you understand where I come from. I'm raised on Maui. I was raised in Makawao and have lived on the Big Island for about 25 years. Most of my professional life, I have been a land use planner, and most of that in the context of large landowners. I started early as a consultant in downtown Honolulu after graduate school, and then 5 years with AmFac when AmFac still owned 5 plantations, and I managed Puna Sugar's assets when Puna shut down in the 80s. And then spent a little time on Kauai as the managing director of Kauai when Joanne just got elected. Spent a year there, and then moved back to Hilo and went to work for Kamehameha Schools, and for 15 years managed the agriculture and conservation assets on this island on Maui, and kind of worked statewide in planning really this transition of landscape that's really defined this last period since the 80s as sugar and pineapple have receded and agriculture has changed dramatically. So that's my background. That's where I come at this. I teach at the university part-time in land use planning, and I do a little bit of independent consulting. This project is something that Scott really wanted to see happen. And I want to introduce right now my partner in this process, Ryan Perroy. Ryan, just wave your hand back here. Ryan is the person responsible for the GIS program, the Geographic Information Program at University of Hawaii at Hilo, and he runs the Spatial Data Analysis and Visualization Lab, SDAV, which is where this comes from. So he's been a great partner. He is actually the principal investigator because he's a university employee, and has been a real good contributor to this conversation. So thank you, Ryan, for being here. He's getting to see this presentation for the first time. And I'm disappointed Scott's not here because it was his first chance to see it as well. So what you're getting really today is a preview of a digital mapping effort that we've done for the last 6-8 months to kind of identify where Hawaii farms, in what areas, and what do we farm in a variety of different farm categories. So, and the purpose of doing that is really to try and figure out, to give us all kind of a common view of what the agricultural footprint is, and I can kind of go in at it from that. The origins of this, how many people have seen this document? Raise your hand. This is the Hawaii County Food Self-Sufficiency Baseline Study that we did, again, out of the SDAV lab in 2012. It's on the web. You can Google it. It mapped in detail the agricultural footprint of the Big Island and talked in some detail about the history of each of those areas as a context that kind of explains some of what's going on and why. And also takes a look at food production and what kinds of foods we produce. But it was fairly well received statewide, and other counties were looking to try and duplicate it. And in that process, Scott, as the deputy initially, recognizing its value, and then as the director, said really what we need is a common view of the whole picture at one point in time. So that's what this is about. And there's an old story about the blind men and the elephant, that if you're a bunch of blind men in a room holding on to different portions of the elephant will describe a much different critter depending on what portion of the elephant they were holding on to. Whether they were holding the nose or the ear or a leg, their vision and their understanding of the elephant is constrained by what portion of the animal they look at. And as I've been around the state for years doing agriculture, I see that again and again in the ag conversations. People's passions and their regions and where their feet are planted every day define what they know and think about agriculture. And that's good, it gives good depth. But this is an effort to kind of get up to the 30,000 foot level and kind of give a broad sense, an overcast of what's happening in agriculture. So when Mike first asked me to speak here, I said, Mike, what do you think people want to know? And he said he wasn't so concerned about what you want to know, but what you need to know. And he said, put the big picture on the table. So that's what my task is today. And I really look forward to both doing that and in sharing conversations and questions at the end of that. So let's just move through that. So the first thing is, how do you do an agricultural land use footprint? Basically, we started with satellite aerial photography to map the crops. We've used a whole variety of satellite choices, Google, Worldview 2, a whole number of different pieces, and we've digitized as much as we can see. We've done a lot of discussions with landowners, and I've had the benefit of traveling the state through this project to talk to lots of farmers and kind of understand what's really going on the ground. And to the extent that I listen well, I got some of that. And a little bit of drive-by ground truthing. I'll tell you, there are places you don't drive when you go look around at agriculture, and you wait to be invited in, and people aren't always looking for some strange rent-a-car to pull up on their property. But looking and getting that ground is important. And then we use real property tax and state and county water data as one source, and a number of other sources of data that would help us identify where people are farming. This project was not intended, it's really intended to try and get at the commercial production of agriculture. We're not mapping people's backyard gardens, we're not mapping their small orchards in the backyard, and in fact, by contract, anything under 3 acres, we didn't need to map. I know from watching agriculture that there's a lot of really powerful agriculture going on small lots, and about, I'd say 20% of the polygons we created are under a couple of acres in size. So we really tried to get down to small pieces, but I'm sure we didn't get everybody's small farm. That's just the nature of it, but we're trying to get the big cast of this. So what is a baseline? Basically, it's a snapshot in time. It just takes a snapshot, and it's a tool for measuring both forward and backwards. It's a way for identifying where you've come from and how much you've changed back, and also a tool to look forward and monitor change over time. It's not a plan, and it doesn't have recommendations. We're not trying to create a body of new directions for the county out of this. But if in its best use, a baseline is really a tool to provoke informed conversation. It gives everybody that bigger picture of the elephant, and therefore a conversation that's based on the whole beast rather than the part that everybody holds on to. So, this is the first image, is what the islands of Hawaii looked like 300 years ago. This is a native Hawaiian footprint, and it was put together by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the Nature Conservancy. So Sam Gon, I saw Sam Gon make this presentation some time ago, and it stuck in my head as a useful tool to anchor this conversation. So in red are areas that, based on archaeological evidence, based on a variety of knowledge in a pool of intelligent people, might have been used to support a population of 500,000 people in a 100% self-sufficient environment. Whether that happened all at one time or it happened over time and moved through properties, good question. But this just gives you a brief glimpse at a 300-year-old baseline for what it might have looked like. And it's informed speculation, but it's certainly fed by some of the most intelligent and knowledgeable people I know who put that together. Now the next image we have comes, well, it's a 1937 image. And this was put together by the Territorial Planning Board of the day as part of a 1939 inventory. And if you like to read cool old stuff, this is a remarkable document. It really defines a lot of what Hawaii looked like in 1939. This work was done in 37. So in pink is sugarcane. In orange, and sometimes it's a little hard to discern, orange is pineapple, Molokai, Lanai. And for the most part, the yellow is what they called grazing. Maybe not all pasture, but they presumed that lands that weren't in forest reserves, perhaps cattle were a roam on. And then for smaller agricultural activities, and it's hard to see, they used a series of alphabet to identify where other kinds of crops were. So in 1937, there were 34 plantations, sugar plantations, 9 pineapple plantations, and you might call this the high tide of agriculture in the state. There was still cane in Kahuku, there was cane in Waimanalo, in Waianae, in Waimanalo. North Kohala's plantations were still operating, Kilauea Kauai still operating, all of which have changed over time. Now the next time there was a baseline done was in 1980. And this was put together by the Department of Agriculture. And when they mapped it up in big paper maps, they took it to the Office of Planning and they digitized it. They put it this is kind of the first digital map of Hawaii's agricultural footprint. And you can find it today. It's on the web in the Office of Office of State Planning's data set. And it's called the Agricultural Land Utilization Map in 1980. This is the last time we did this exercise. So you can imagine the change coming. So again, you can see the sugar in pink. Pineapple is receded. Del Monte has left Molokai. Still Dole in a portion of central Molokai. Kohala sugar shut down. Kahuku shut down. Kilauea shut down. These are all in the 70s. And there are about 250,000 crop acres. Take that back. There are 350,000 acres in crop. Okay, that's sugar, pine, and all other things. And about 1.1 million acres in pasture. So following this in 1980, there is a pretty significant collapse, beginning in 1980 with the shutdown of Puna Sugar Company, and then very quickly in the 1990s, the collapse of 13 of the 14 plantations that were basically defined rural land use around the state. So in each one of these communities, how many in this room have had experience during a shutdown of sugar? We're actually around and involved in that. Give me a hand. Good. I'm glad there's still some older, well, not that old. Sorry. But I also want to recognize how many people did not understand sugar, who weren't here when the sugar industry was here. And yeah, there's a lot of us out there. And I think that it's important to understand this transition because it lays the foundation for where we are today in many ways. There are a couple of things that happened dramatically during this period in time. Maybe most significant is land ownership patterns fracture. Okay? For years, the green sheet of sugar that laid over a landscape statewide hid a variety of tenure underneath it. People who would lease lands to the sugar companies, private ownership of a variety of different types. But as this process evolved, some of the big five, the C. Brewer, Castle and Cook, AmFac, Theo Davies, C. Brewer, I guess, did I say them? Some of them simply disappeared altogether. So in this coast, AmFac's gone altogether. They own 0 acres in the state. C. Brewer, the same way. They were a major landowner statewide. They own 0. Theo Davies, the same thing. Other large landowners like the Campbell estate basically have liquidated. So you're seeing this underlying control structure of land dissipate. Community gets redefined. And you can see it in this room today in terms of how many people know or are around or were involved in that during that period in time, knew sugar or didn't know sugar. There's a whole new body of rural residents. Leadership gets redefined. The role of the unions in rural communities was always a very strong piece of the politics of Hawaii. That's pretty much gone when it comes to rural Hawaii today. Plantation workers got worked in other places. They're no longer working in the fields, they're not in agriculture. And there was a real exodus of equipment and machinery that could help fix drainage, fight fires, do things that the plantations, we'd kind of depended on them for many generations to do. So that's what we look like today. Here's just a couple of color hints. In the central plain of Maui, sugar, that's the last of the sugar operations. In yellow is pasture, substantially reduced, a lot of it leaving for purchases of federal government, purchased a fair amount of that, kahuku, hakalau lands. People have taken their lands out of pasture and put them into koa reforestation. Military bought some land up here, PTA. In purple is diversified agriculture. In this light green is the seed companies. And this darker green up here is the commercial forestry operations that have come along the Hamakua coast particularly. And there's still a little bit of pineapple here and in a couple of other locations on Maui as well. So we went from 350,000 acres of crop, I think it says 153,000 acres, and about 760,000 acres in pasture. So we've actually been past low tide in the last 10 years in terms of the amount of agricultural land in use. And we've started to rebuild that. But in the 1990s, after the end of these shutdowns, we hit the low tide. We hit the lowest of low tides in centuries in terms of the amount of agricultural land use. And now we're beginning to rebuild it. And we're rebuilding it on a variety of different, on a basis in different places. Places are different, each one coming up with its own kinds of solutions. So I'll take a walk through this and we'll give you some details about what that looks like. First off, just in terms of overall crop summary, sugar is still the largest crop in the state at about 38,000. I think HCNS says they do 36,000 acres. You add the mill, you add some of the other lands around the outside that aren't croplands, that's about 38,000. The next largest is the seed industry at about 23,000. I'm not being able to see them from here, but you can see it. It's about 24,000 acres. The next largest is the commercial forest industry. Neither the seed industry nor the forest industry were even measured in 1980. They've simply emerged in that period in time. The macadamia nut industry is the 4th largest, and it's almost entirely on this island except for a little bit on the Wailuku area of Maui. And diversified agriculture is the next piece at about 16,800 acres. Beyond that, there's a little bit of dairy here, a little bit of foliage, pineapple, papaya, There's about 610 acres of low-E taro in the state. That's just taro grown in a wetland setting. And coffee. Coffee grew substantially during that period, during this period. So just watch the screen for a second. And tell me what you see. That's the 1980 look. It's today. One more time. Okay. Just to get a feel for the transition. It's a statewide transition. Every community has felt it. These changes have been profound in agriculture. So, and we're emerging in some new ways. So there are a couple of lessons that come out of this process for me as I watch this. One is that each region evolves separately based on the opportunities that are around it. And think about that. Think about being in Lahaina. Alika knows this. Being in Lahaina when the plantations and the pineapple operations go down. Anybody who wanted a job working was going to go find a job in the hotel business because there was a lot of business and a lot of activity. Finding new workers to work in that environment, finding people who are willing to go out every day, like Brother James does over there, and work hard in the fields in the hot Lahaina sun. It's a slow uptake, and it's been a slow uptake. So in areas where there was closer to marketplace, you'll see more of that. Who owns the land matters. Okay, so if the state owns land or your Kamehameha schools and you don't have an exit strategy, you're not trying to part with your land holdings, you approach agriculture differently. You approach it as if you're trying to manage it for the long term. If you bought property on the Hamakua coast and were waiting to resell it, then you have a different kind of an owner doing a different kind of a thing. We're very fortunate here in this community to have Ed Olson, who picked up a substantial amount of South Hilo and in the Ka'u area. He's invested a lot of money in building agriculture and planting coffee and cocoa and macadamia nuts and investing in it. But those people are few and far between in terms of who bought the lands next. Probably the most important issue from an agriculture perspective is that the weight shifted for diversified agriculture into the central plain of Oahu. This is an area that grew no real diversified agriculture 30 years ago, and today there is more diversified agriculture in the central plain of Oahu than there is in the rest of the state combined. Okay, so, and why? I mean, seems logical, right? And this is right there in the middle of the urban core, but the truth is that's where the market is. And this is also an area for very large farmers, people who are farming 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 acres at a time. These companies are producing substantial amounts of new, fresh, local produce. And they're right next to the market. They put it in a truck and they deliver it to wherever it's going. And on the neighbor islands, or in farther rural farms, most of that farming is in a smaller setting. People are buying smaller pieces. They're more decentralized, they're smaller, they're more diversified. And they have to compete against the central plain if they're trying to sell into the central marketplace. Now, they meet their needs perhaps more in their own communities than they do by shipping it to Honolulu. So let's take a look statewide. The island of Kauai, again, green is seed. This brown is coffee. Purple is diversified agriculture. Red is taro. And this has the state land use boundary in the light green. And in green, the other green is pasture use. What's in active pasture use. So here's just a little lesson I take from looking at this map. This area in Keikaha, largely owned by the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the state of Hawaii, and managed by the Ag Development Corp. It's in a large use. It takes a large user. There are pumps in here that have to be run all of the time, otherwise this backs up and becomes a wetland again. This is the Robinson Estate. They own it all, they manage it all, they're very tight about what they do. This is Alexander and Baldwin. They put in 5,000 acres of coffee, and now there's about a 3,000 acre commercial mechanically harvested coffee operation. And Grove Farm, now owned by Steve Case et al., picks up this portion of Lehui. This is where the core of agriculture is happening, and these guys put out a lot of regular employment in agriculture, be it coffee or seed or whatever. And they manage the resources in a broad way. If you go north of Lehui, from about Hanamalu north, these are AmFac Lehui plantation properties, all sold, all in multiple hands. Bette Midler, a whole variety of very wealthy people bought properties. And you see that that agriculture is kind of finding its way. It's still trying to get itself up off its feet. And when you come up to the Kilauea area, this was C. Brewer's property, entirely sold, bought by, in many cases, the 1/10 of 1% of the economic structure of the country in terms of the wealth that's gone into these people. Lots of famous people and the like. So it's still trying to find its way. It's got a big heart for agriculture, but it's still fractured. So just notice, then when large ownership persists, there is a persistence of larger scale agriculture, and when it breaks into small pieces, it's kind of every farm for themselves. Just take a couple of quick pictures. This is the Molawa lands on Kauai. It's probably the most intensively farmed concentration of small farmers. There's a great story at Molawa, partly because it began as a first private agricultural park. In other words, lots were cut up without residential use, and therefore the residential value didn't appear in the asset. And farmers could farm just based on the farm value of the property. This was done when AmFac was there, and when I was working for AmFac, I managed those properties. When AmFac sold it, the next guys were most interested in building the residential component on those properties. And over time, that started to happen. They've negotiated with the county over time to allow for more residential use on those properties. And what that does is when a farmer would say, I need to be there because I have to protect my farm, but what happens is it ends up getting picked up by somebody who's going to put a 5,000 square foot house next to the coast and landscape their property. So this is tropical fruit and diversified ag, and it's the story behind it really is the story between real estate and agricultural value, and that's a repeating story statewide. And there's about 450 acres of lo'i taro, of wetland taro on the island of Kauai. It's about 70% of the state's total supply of wetland taro. And about 360 acres of that are right here on the North Shore from Hanalei out to Lumahai. These folks have, they face all kinds of challenges related to doing taro, let alone the price and the amount of work it takes. It's also been bought by, this portion of land here has been bought by the National Fish and Wildlife to set aside for wetland birds. So as a result, there are whole areas of the old taro lands that have been turned into bird habitat instead of taro, and we're managing for birds. And in many of those farmers, they're struggling with the presence of the birds, the nene, the alai, yeah, because they can't even oosh them out of their property. Come time to harvest, you can't oosh them because they're an endangered species. So several longtime farmers have actually moved to other areas on Kauai to try and get away from that intervention. And birds are just one portion of the problem. I mean, apple snails, blight, there are a whole series of things that affect taro. But there are 610 acres of lo'i taro in the state today. In 1980, I think there were 710. So we've lost a bit. So Central Oahu. The largest amount of crop on the island is diversified agriculture. Second is seed. I think that's pineapple. And then a variety of smaller operations. And the bulk of it lies right here in the Central Plain from Haleiwa to Ewa. just a closer up look. You can see the, say there's 700, this is just up here to Schofield. There's a big piece of land right in the middle that's Schofield, and we'll never really, Wahiawa and Schofield Barracks that isn't going to go into agriculture. So anyway, there's a variety of pineapple in small plots, diversified agriculture. And the seed companies bought fee simple lands from the Campbell Estate. They were able to pick them up when the Campbell Estate put them on the market, and that's why they're there. And that's why they're embedded, because they own the lands themselves. This is the largest banana plantation in the United States, run by Sugarland Farms. And a fair portion of this is the Larry Jeffs Farm, Alloon, the Hose, a variety of others. And down here is the blast zone around Pearl Harbor that will always be available for agriculture because you can't put a house in it. Those are the two developments that we hear a lot about, Ho'opili and Koa Ridge. This piece right here in Neva has been part of the urban planning for many decades, but recently when they went through the rezoning, they certainly took a lot of heat for the fact that they're going to relocate some good ag land. It's unfortunate. Same thing with this Koa Ridge up here with Castle and Cook. There is some good ag land going to be priced at that. And at some point, Oahu's going to draw some hard lines. They're doing their important ag land study today, and I think you'll see much less of that kind of large-scale urbanization of ag land following this.
Jeff, that's not a done deal though yet, right?
What?
Ho'opili.
Got its zoning. The city and county has already approved its zoning. Koa Ridge, I don't think so. You know, Waianae is interesting. Waianae has always been a real productive place for agriculture in the state. It's a dry, harsh land. It doesn't have an irrigation system. It uses entirely domestic water systems to do its agriculture. And there's about 470 acres of diversified crops out there today. For many years, it was the core of our dairy operations, poultry operations, piggeries, diversified ag of a whole variety. And it persists as such. I was struck when I drove around it how much of that has been planted in sweet basil. I'd say 300 acres of that 500 acres in sweet basil, all as an export crop, all sent to Chicago and the West Coast. Grown primarily by Laotian and Thais who've come in and leased property in the middle of Waianae. So where we were once, that was once a productive area feeding food into the central Oahu marketplace, it's now primarily exporting by air sweet basil, galangal, betel leaf, a variety of other kinds of Asian spices, and air freighting them to the West Coast, to the United States and elsewhere. Maui's agriculture still dominated largely by HC&S. The next largest use is diversified agriculture, and most of that exists up in the Kula area that it has for many decades. There's a little bit of coffee out here in Lahaina, but for the most part, you'll see that the whole West Maui side of the island has very little agriculture to show for the 20 years that it's been out of agriculture. Aliko farms out there in a small greenhouse. James is working hard at some diversified ag just above Lahaina town, but there really are very few significant farming activities on the West Maui Mountains. So the green carpet and the water coming in, these are all very familiar stories for us. I would hate to see it go away just because I think it would turn the Central Plain into a dust bowl, and you have to be very careful about that. But I know there are changes coming at HC&S at some point. This is the upcountry Maui between Pukalani and Keokea, the lower and the upper Kula roads. And this is the primary core of diversified agriculture. There's a little bit of pineapple here just above the cane line, and some tropical flowers, primarily Protea. And then there's some tropical fruit. There's a fair amount of persimmons and other kinds of fruits grown in Kula. Kula is in it's a very excellent place to farm, and the county, this is the only county-run ag park in the state, and there are 20 farmers there in 5 to 20 acre lots, and it's a persistent area of farming, and there is no exit strategy for the county property except to keep it in farming. So that's a rich resource, and it gets water off of the ditch. The entire rest of that community gets water off the domestic system. And this probably is the logical eroder of that over time. As small farmers decide what they wish to hand off to their children, do they hand them off a farm that ties them to that farm for the rest of their life, or do they sell it and give them $1 million apiece and say, you know, have a good life? The challenge of real estate on top of good agriculture is profound across the state, and with the kind of views and the climate of Kula, you can see why this is a very attractive place. And there's been a lot of eroding of the agricultural activity in more recent years. Molokai, all agriculture is really right in the Central Plain, Ho'olehua Plain. The seed companies are the largest farmer and the largest employer in agriculture. There's a variety of diversified ag. Actually, Larry Jeffs farms some vegetables here and still ships them out. And there are sweet potatoes and the Hawaiian homestead farmers in the homesteads up here at Ho'olehua. Molokai doesn't have varroa mite, it doesn't have ring spot virus, and it doesn't have CBB, the coffee borer. As a result, there is still papaya being grown here. This is the Kumu Farms that you see in the marketplace. That's the non-GMO papaya varieties grown here, but because they don't have the ring spot virus on that island yet. There's also about 100 acres of coffee, and that's fairly small commercial mechanically harvested operation that's sold a lot of its land off most recently. Okay, so Hawaii Island, our two biggest players on Hawaii Island are macadamia nuts and commercial forestry. Then there's a whole range of other crops that compete in that, diversified ag, papayas, some bananas, or the dairy operator. We have 2 dairies here. Let's take a quick look. So you can, again, just to remind you, this are the state land use boundaries in the light green. Darker green are pastures. Just north of where we are today, up the coast in North and South Hilo, what was sugar has largely gone into a variety of tree crops, macadamia nuts, tropical fruits, and some of Kamehameha School's lands went into eucalyptus forestry. And there is a little bit of dairy growing grass out on the coast, growing corn out on the coast. This purple there's probably 800, I don't have a good number, there's probably 800 acres of sweet potato grown on this island. All Okinawan sweet potato. Virtually all of it exported. It's all run through the irradiator and sent to the West Coast, to the Asian markets in the West Coast. 16 million pounds in 2013. So this is a nomadic crop. It doesn't stay in the same place for more than a year, partly because it doesn't sort. It sorts in the field and leaves its seconds often in the field to continue to be fed on. It doesn't turn it. It doesn't put a cover crop on the top of it. And frankly, its rows go up and down the hill. So they're not generally cooperators in the Soil Conservation Service way, but they are a group of farmers making money, turning product out the door and sending it to the West Coast. We see the seconds. We see a fair amount of this in our marketplace, but it's generally the seconds that we send. So it's a big area of use, but I'm not sure on the long term a real sustainable use. And they're running out of virgin land. They're constantly looking for new lands to farm. If you go up the Hamakua coast, again, the forestry investment that Kamehameha Schools leased to is still in place, and then there's a big piece that Parker put in. This is the dairy, the Big Island Dairy. They've just invested $15 million to expand their dairy operation, and they grow about 40% of their cattle feed on site or bring it in from local sources. The Hamakua Ditch, which is a big water source, still yet to kind of get very much diversified agriculture underneath it. There is a co-op and there are pockets of emerging diversified ag. And much of this will end up in the cattle business because you can irrigate pasture and there's a slaughterhouse right here. So it'll allow for that grass to be fed in order to feed the cattle more effectively and basically fatten them up before you slaughter. This is our core agricultural diversified ag core, the Lalamilo and the Puukapu farm lots in Waimea, fed by the Waimea irrigation system. There's a fair amount of land in the Department of Hawaiian Homes that is not in active farming and could be, and there's a great effort going on up there by Wild Farms, people at Wild Farms and the Homesteaders Association to try and provoke some new agriculture, primarily in greenhouse operations, to get Hawaiian homesteaders involved, at least in part-time farming activities. This is some of the oldest, most well, these are the guys, when you grab their hand, you know they've been farming their whole lives in the Lalamila farm lots. And they tell me that probably about 50% of what they grow goes to Honolulu and about 50% stays here locally as part of our local food supply. The Kona Coast is, again, primarily an orchard environment because of the lack of soil. The lighter brown is coffee, the darker is macadamia nuts. And if you take the whole of the Kona Coast, they're about 6,800 acres, it gets down to Mac Farms. This is a very rich environment for agriculture, and digitizing it was the worst piece of the whole effort because it's all been there a long time. It's really hard to tell the difference between a fruit tree, an avocado tree, a ulu tree, a macadamia nut tree, and much of the coffee has macadamia nuts and coffee grown on the same property underneath it. So I think it's about 20% of all the little circles we made, we had to make them here. But it's also a very rich production area. Particularly, the biggest piece of it is an export crop, but there's a lot of other kinds of fruit trees and the like that put good food into this community and into the state as a whole. We mapped pasture acres in some detail. About 73% of that pasture area is here on this island. This is really where the core of cattle production is. And Oahu just a very little bit. There are slaughterhouses on each one of these islands. The bulk of the cattle industry today is still shipped out. They're cow-calf operations. They sell their calves to the mainland, put them on a container and send them to the mainland. But there are several efforts, particularly by Parker Ranch and by the Ku'iwi Ranch folks in Ka'u, to build a grass-fed, pasture-fed business to keep some of those animals at home.
Do you have a comparison between the amount of land used for growing vegetables compared to the amount of pasture used for cattle? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, he's asking to compare the difference between the amount of acres in cattle pasture use and the amount in vegetable use. Numerically, I think the number was 16,000 in diversified agricultural crops, and that doesn't include bananas and papayas and some of the other things that we eat here locally, but just diversified crops.
Or just as a whole, anything grown for like plants, vegetables, fruits compared to cattle?
I'd have to look at that number again, but I would say 30 or 40,000 acres to 763. But I don't think it's a fair comparison, and it's pretty irrelevant, frankly, because it isn't like those lands could be used for something else. That's the point I want to make.
As far as the relevancy is, I'm just trying to get an answer.
Yeah, no problem. But there's the difference. But I think the comparison is it's apples and oranges because of the nature of the lands you would farm and the nature of the lands you would pasture. So there may be a small interface overlap in some place, but I'll tell you there's so much land available for agriculture in different places. And the cattle industry has shrunk down a lot, and some of it has come from other crops, and some of it's gone to koa forests, and some of it's gone to other kinds of things in the last 30 years. But I think anyway, so again, we're down to about 750,000 acres in pasture use. This is probably one more related to natural farming. I started mapping pig farms. And you go to Waianae and you can see these ponds, right? They're kind of in the back in the bushes, and you can see a little water flowing into them, and they're the waste ponds, you know. So I started mapping them, and I thought, it's not right. I shouldn't be doing this, you know, because someone's going to come along and go, hey, you guys, look at that. You know? So I talked to people at the Department of Ag, and they said, well, yeah, probably that's not a good idea. So they gave, they actually know where all of the pig farms are. They have to know. When porcine diarrhea came here last December, they needed to go to every one of those farms to make sure that was being dealt with and it wasn't being harbored in any particular farm. They got the GPS locations for each of those gates for each of those farms. So they gave us numbers in terms of the total sow count that they knew about on the island and where they were, kind of by judicial district. So that's what this map shows you, is that in red are area, you know, using this as the key for these colors, the numbers of sows per district. You know, assume a sow gives birth twice a year, maybe throws 8 piglets a time. The heaviest concentration is in the Waianae area, Waianae, Waimanalo. Oahu is about 58% of the pig production in the state, and primarily because it has access to the slop and the food waste out of Oahu. And there's a little bit of that on Maui as well. But for the most part, the cost of grain, the cost of meeting environmental regulations for wastewaters have really eroded the pig production business. And we're still importing a fair number of live pigs into Honolulu for the Chinese hot market, and much of the local production is really sold off as small piglets to different folks to raise themselves or to eat young. There's almost no real commercial agriculture on pig, except on Kauai. There is a fair amount of local production on Kauai from one large farm that actually feeds, it gets into the local marketplace.
I can't tell the difference in the colors in the Hilo and Puna districts between the 1 to 200 and the 2 to 400 pigs.
Okay, that's a good point. This is a draft and we're working on the colors. I think they're about the same though. You know, I don't know that there's a distinction. I have to go look at those numbers again, but you're right, we're working on colors. So there is, huh?
Do you know in those districts whether it's more the 1 to 200 or more 2 to 400 sows in those areas?
Yeah, I said 1 to 200. Just an estimate. So we've also done a little bit of work on bees, and Danielle Downey has been helpful for us. She's the state apiary person. And this was just an effort. There is a data set that they collect voluntary beekeepers in colonies. And so we broke it down by judicial district and mapped them by color. And one thing that's very clear is that the South Kona district is really the most significant bee population area. We're big exporters of queen bees. We supply something like 70% of all of Canada's queen bees for commercial bee operations. But they're a major player in the United States as well. And recently, the introduction of varroa mite and the hive beetle have had a real impact on decimating the wild hives that have been evolving and have come out of the commercial hives over the years. So without those wild hives, the commercial hives, the managed hives, the ones that are being taken care of on a regular basis, become much more important for pollination. Because a lot of times the macadamia nut guys didn't need somebody from outside because they had plenty of wild bees. Not so many anymore. Try walk up the forest during flowering at an ohia tree. In the old days, you could hear it before you saw it. Now you got to see it before you hear it. And that's really the evolution of that wild hive collapse that happened as a result of some of these introductions. So, just coming to an end, I just want to make the point that in this process, we talk about agriculture as if it's a one thing. Lots of conversation about agriculture, but it's not a one thing, it's a many thing. And it's different by place, by crop, by people, by method, by land ownership. All these things are the underlying features that help to define what happens where around the state. And what I would do is simply take some questions or thoughts or whatever. The point of this effort, this whole exercise, is about creating kind of a common understanding of what's on the ground and then thinking about it. What does it teach us? What does it tell us about change? Yeah? A couple of answers. One is that some folks... Oh, the question was, thank you very much. The question was, where are we getting our mapping data? Where are we picking up the information? We've used Google. Google's a very useful tool because you can actually slide it back and forth and look at time, depth, and see, get a cloudless image sometimes. We have Worldview 2 imagery. We have picked up a couple of different pockets of imagery that were flown more recently. And in some cases, landowners provided us the data themselves. HCNS gave us their data. The forestry industry gave us their data. Already done, already mapped as their operational mapping tool. So some of it came from the original source, some of it digitized off of a variety of different uses. Yeah.
What is the department's policy on self-sufficiency and sustainability?
The guy who was supposed to answer that's not here. And, I don't know. My sense is that, and I'm not going to try to answer for Scott, so I don't want to try to answer it from a department perspective. The question was, what's the department's position on self-sufficiency and sustainability? And I think part of what the answer is that this is all part of a whole cloth, and that there's room for lots of different kinds of agriculture. And if you simply, so I don't think there's anything that says, no, not that. I mean, that would be silly, right? There are lots of kinds of agriculture going on. And so that's the answer is there's no reason to think that it's not a good idea. Chris?
Thank you for this presentation. My question is about the type of agriculture that's currently going on in the state of Hawaii. How much of agriculture in the state of Hawaii stays in Hawaii? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, the question is how much agriculture in Hawaii stays in Hawaii? And I think it's a good question, and it's a complicated one. If you took the diversified ag one and said there's 16,000 acres of diversified ag, I'd say most of that stays there, all but for, let's say 500, 600 acres of basil and another 800 acres of sweet potato that run out the door. There's a little bit of export of onions from small guys. I mean, every now and then there's a pocket market in the U.S. where you can grow onions and sell them real well in the down market during the year. But I'd say that the export process is what gives us the papaya industry. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't be growing the papayas we're growing. The same is true, but most of the banana stays here. Most of the lychee, most of the tropical fruits that we can't treat, we keep. So you'd have to kind of go through the individual list and figure out a percentage and then look at it from an acres perspective, maybe. Maybe 50% of the papaya stays here. So it kind of depends by the type. Yeah, in the back.
Maps available online?
They will be. They will be posted on the Department of Agriculture's website and in the Department of Office of Planning as a digital layer. They may actually also be put in as a KMZ, which is something you can open up in Google Earth. So as I said at the beginning, this is a preview. We'll be done with this product by maybe the end of October, and it's still subject to the kind of acceptance. I can't give you these numbers and this whole thing today because frankly, they haven't even seen it yet. I was hoping Scott would see it for the first time today. But it is, one of the things I do these presentations, and I welcome the opportunity to do it, is it starts to give me a better sense of what the feedback and response is, because this can make it better and focus it more effectively as a result. Yeah, in the back, Auntie?
I appreciate your statement about, the exit strategy for. I just wanted to find out more, if you could shed light on the east, southeast, and southwest districts of the Big Island, in the way of agricultural interests or goals.
So you're talking about the southeast and southwest, this lower portion, South Kona Ka'u, is that what you're asking about? Oh, South Hilo, up to South Hilo? One of the things about this side of the island, it's kind of a planning nightmare because they went through and cut up a ton of properties without any infrastructure in them, but it still gives people a chance to get a hold of a 1, 2, 3, 5 acre parcel at a reasonable price. Think about it. Most of the tropical fruit business, most of the cut flower business, most of the macadamia nut business, most of the papaya business are all based in the Puna district in South Hilo. This is on C, D, and E lands. There's no irrigation system. But that agriculture persists, not because of the soil and not because of some irrigation system. It's because people can afford to live there. They can put these crops up on benches and they grow them on benches. That the potential for agriculture is not just about soil and water, and we keep kicking at that. But the truth is, there's a ton of agriculture going on in Puna, and we got none of that. So 89% of the agriculture on the island of Hawaii is on C, D, and E lands. 50% of it is just D and E quality. This is Land Study Bureau, ABCD ranking. So one of the good things is that there's a lot of opportunity for small guys to explore and expand here in that particular area of Hilo, of Puna and South Hilo. You get into South Hilo, the land gets more expensive. Is this true? Yeah, back. In the ag district, yes, but
I didn't really see it where I expected to see it on the map that they got on. Maybe it was there and I just had the impression about that was higher up.
so what lands were you talking about specifically?
In Hamakua side, managed core.
Right, and you like Umikor Ranch and the group that's the Hawaiian Legacy Hardwoods. What I was trying to map, his question is about the koa resource and whether or not new koa was being mapped in this process. I talked to each of those folks and I asked the question, is this a commercial operation? Are you planting it for the purpose of harvest, or are we planting it for the purpose of stewardship and long-term forest management? Kamehameha Schools, who's been planting at Keoho Ranch since the 1950s or 60s, they may take a couple of trees, but for the most part, they're not intending to turn this into a logging operation. Certainly not like the Hamakua Coast eucalyptus. Same was true with the Legacy Hardwoods. They sell it as if it's going to be sold, but they told me, the bulk of this is legacy pieces, people putting their name on a tree or their auntie's name on a tree or their father's name on a tree and wishing it to grow forever. So it's, that was an interesting balance question, but we put up some of it, yeah. Because it wasn't a commercial use. She says, why doesn't it appear on the map? But I think you had another question. You were going to ask a question, and I went around you. Yeah.
Jeff, are you the person we can primarily thank for the Hawaii County food self-sufficiency basin?
There are probably a couple of us, but yeah, I wrote it.
Do you know if the state has appreciated you and created one for the entire state?
Well, that's what this is intended to do in part. Okay, so it started at that level and it then grew to the statewide. And Scott understood it when he saw it the first time from here, and he said, let's take it up another step and let's do it statewide. The difference is this process, this report isn't going to focus so much on trying to get food data in one pile, because they've contracted Sustain Hawaii to try and do that and come up with some dashboard of things you can watch. But the truth is, and this is just a very important truth, is agricultural data sucks. We aren't collecting it. We're telling ourselves we're going to produce twice the amount of agriculture in the state. And from what to what? We don't have a clue. And we stopped, we laid off 25 enumerators at the Department of Agriculture in 2007, and from that point on, we have a blank in our agricultural monitoring process. So
the USDA on the mainland has the farm census. Does that happen here?
yes, she's asking about the National Farm Census, NAS, the National Ag Statistics Service. Yes. Understand that NAS is really aimed at mapping and collecting data out of large-scale commodity productions. That's really what it was intended for, because people invest in the futures of these things, and whether it's orange juice or pork bellies, they want to know, they want data on that stuff. Because we're a boutique player and a small player, their tools are fairly blunt objects for getting that kind of data. Kathy King, who is the new head of that here, has a real interest in expanding that and developing a system that starts to be more responsive to our small-scale operations. She's talking about doing a cocoa one that, nobody's ever really done anything on cocoa before. So NAS is a tool. I look at it it's a survey tool, and it's only as good as people who respond to the survey. I asked Kathy the other day if Larry Jeffs fills out the form, and she says no. Larry puts out a pound of food for every resident of the state of Hawaii every 6 days, and he's not putting his numbers in.
And also to go off of that, we're grouped in with the Pacific region. So if you consider that includes California, Hawaii is very minor compared to California. So a lot of the money goes to bigger states.
Yeah.
Well, and many of the questions on that form, because I filled it out many times on the mainland, many of the questions are completely irrelevant to agriculture in Hawaii.
Yes.
So Kathy's trying to make some changes to that and
Yeah.
make it more applicable and useful.
Yeah, support Kathy in that effort. It's a big deal, and she's trying to be a trim tab at the bottom of a big ship that doesn't turn. Uncle, back there. Oh, you're standing already? Okay.
Yeah. I was able to come here in '99 and buy ag land, mostly grazing land, for $6,000 an acre in a place where most of the ag land is sold like ag 20 and up. That same year, other people just across the highway bought the same land, probably paid the same price, have been able to subdivide 100 down to 20-acre parcels and sell by the acre for $50,000 an acre. So I guess I'm wondering why zoning and planning doesn't prevent that extreme increase in the value of the land. And land that, is hard to work, so.
That's kind of the $10,000 question in terms of agriculture in Hawaii and the interface between it and real estate. There's no doubt about that. Although it's interesting to note that on the Hamakua coast between the Wailuka River and Waipio, the last time there was a state land use application that changed agriculture lands to urban was in 1976. And it was plantations trying to expand plantation camps. So for the most part, what you've seen on that coast has not been really new subdivision, but when you take the green carpet off the top of the land, there is a settlement pattern there, ahupua'a boundaries, grant boundaries, LCAs, roads that run now in between them and split them up. They are pre-existing lots. And for the most part, that's what settled the bulk of South Hilo, is those existence of pre-existing lots, which can be put out and reformed and resold. And a lot of money's been made doing just that. But yeah, the increase in value drives a lot of that. Uncle in the hat?
I think all the people here are very concerned with food security on a small scale and growing food for the people of Hawaii. That's our biggest concern, I think, you are now the governor of the state of Hawaii. What would you do for agriculture? What would the changes be made so that we can actually start seeing transformation in agriculture to feed our own people? Yeah, you it's like, I mean, you're a farmer. You have more knowledge than most people in legislation.
Well, he's putting me on the spot here. He wants me to tell him what the answer is. And I would say that it's a menu, not a meal, right off the bat. It's a menu and not a meal. And if you're going to be putting large-scale, I mean, if I was, like I said, I mean, if Larry Jeffs says, I put out a pound of food for every resident in the state of Hawaii every 6 days, I'd feed that one because he's going to continue to do it. That's one answer. But when you get outside of the central plain of Oahu, then it is a diversified agricultural circumstance. People are going to be aiming at the marketplaces that are closest to them. And food safety pops its head up right there in the middle of that process, because if you want to get to more people, you're going to have to deal with the food safety issue. If you're not farming at an economic scale, I don't know how to help you, because if the farmer makes money, he'll keep farming, and if not, eventually they're going to stop farming. So the scale is an important piece of that, whatever that scale is for you. For Vince, it's a 1/4 acre, and he does fine with that, right?
2,000 square feet.
Oh, 2,000 square feet, my goodness. No wonder you have all this time to do the...
Yeah, right.
So, you know, I think the truth is, and I'll just end, I mean, I would just kind of finish that comment with, really, it is a menu, and it's a whole variety of solutions, and it depends on where, and different communities need to look at how you meet those needs. I, for years, have watched places like Kohala and Ka'u and these very remote locations saying, we're going to be the breadbasket for the state of Hawaii, and we got all this land, and Hamakua is going to feed everybody. If you look back at it today, it's just not there. And it's because the real practical realities of agriculture in a remote location are all about transportation and energy costs and gasoline and delivery, and how do you get the guy off the farm to go take his stuff to where it needs to go. And those are just fundamental challenges about doing ag in a rural community. Doing it so that you feed your neighbors, aloha, bro. That's what that's about. And that's what rural life is about, is working with each other to feed each other. And it doesn't always generate a full income. Maybe it helps you to supplement your income in some way. I saw one more question back here.
I just wanted to point out, so everybody can rest assured that any commodity grown in Hawaii is not irradiated for consumption, it's only for export.
I say that again.
Any commodity grown in Hawaii is not irradiated for local consumption, it's only for export.
Oh, yeah, she's simply making the point that we don't irradiate food unless we ship it out. And that's true. Yeah.
Does the state have any thoughts on the restoration of the HFUU system?
I couldn't tell you that, and I'm not representing the state here. Thanks. Hey, James.
One problem as farmers, we all want to grow a large, bountiful amount of, say, bananas, but we still get imports through APHIS that says we're going to agree to get bananas from the Philippines, we're going to agree to get apple bananas from the Philippines and Ecuador, and that stumps us as farmers because we can't get our market grown to the market because we're competed by this outside, you know, it kind of hurts.
Yeah, and I think there's some bigger global issues that are going to affect that, and certainly the food safety issue is going to do it. Certainly, I think to some degree the Pacific trade agreements are going to have some of that impact. Maybe not so much on bananas, but I guarantee you the flower industry and the foliage industry are going to get hit hard by that. They've already been hit by trade-offs that have been done diplomatically and affected the... Yeah, we're done. Okay, thank you very much.
What a wonderful presentation. Give it up again, please, for Jeff Melrose. You know, it's really sweet to see this work being done by someone who has such sensitivity to local agriculture and what that represents. So we have a resource in Jeff here. The jar that is sent around with the how flour FPJ, if it hasn't been all consumed yet, here's the lid. Okay, so what we're going to do is a few minutes. I want to articulate something. First of all, Greg, don't go anywhere. Who here is president of the chapters on the Big Island? Please stand up. Greg, stand up. Steve Sakala. Richard, where's, is Dash here? Where's Kyle? Is Kyle here? Ned, you're vice president on Kauai. Yeah, you're standing up? Okay, yes, you are. Don't give you that. Okay, so we got leaders here for the Farmers Union. These are all farmers. Isn't that sweet? Can you give them a round of applause? I mean, there's three legs of our organization that we focus in on, and that's education, legislation, and cooperation. So one of the things that we feel and value is the fact of developing food hubs here in the islands. I know Kohala is really taking some leadership in that respect. I'd like to call them an ACDC, energetic by nature, an agriculture community development cooperative. And you know, if we can see those things manifest, then farmers can do what they love to do and farm. And then, you know, I have this vision that someday we're going to be able to go to our markets. You know, right now there's an iPhone app to take your EKG. Okay, you can literally do that. Well, at some point I see scanning devices to where if I'm mining the soil and I'm growing cucumbers, and then we got James growing cucumbers organically, and we both bring them to market, they look like cucumbers, but we're going to be able to scan that produce to where the nutrient density in James organic cucumbers is going to show up, and we can market it with that nutrient density of how much percentage of nutrients is in there. And my mining the soil, the nutrient density is low, while I'll get paid less. All of a sudden you'll see farmers pay attention to their practices, yeah, and start doing more Korean natural farming practices. Also, putting carbon back in the soil is another aspect that we can then generate water prices, to lower water prices for farmers who put more carbon back into their soil with their practices, as opposed to mining the soil again of all life. So I think this is the future of agriculture, personally, in the spirit of holding farmers accountable, and that we can start to create more of a system here, and like Greg was talking about, in feeding the people of Hawaii. We have, through our organization, because we value regenerative forms of agriculture, if you looked on that map that Jeff had, the earlier picture, that was regenerative agriculture. That was agriculture that was built on Aloha Aina and Malama Aina. So that's the direction we are going in. We're not here to make any one or any practice wrong, but what we are here is to support all farmers that are pointed in the direction of regenerating their soils. I manage my soils organically, but I haven't arrived anywhere. You know, I'm constantly honing, but in that direction, as opposed to going in the direction of killing my soil. Yeah. So that's what we value as an organization. Know that your membership will support that. And also another value of membership here, we have local discounts. We're going to be coming out with a white paper through statewide and national of all the discounts you can get through being a member. I saved like $25 on 1 week at Ace Hardware, you know, paid half for my membership. And another aspect is the monthly meetings. These are valuable nuggets of opportunities to get together, where people bring locally produced dishes and share educational, just like we're doing today at a gathering. You know, I know Drake. Where is Drake? Is he in the room? Drake is doing that monthly with Korean Natural Farming in this facility. So support. You know, as a member, I mean, it's better than going to the movies, folks. You know, you can go out, have a night out, and have a nice local meal. And then be able to share and network with others who are doing these practices. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah.